Hello, everybody. This is the weekly group sync for the static site editor. And this is the engineering focus edition. We have no FYIs today, so we'll move on. An engineering general item is milestone 13.3 is here officially. Just a recap, our primary objective is to get the static site editor integrated with the whole handbook in this milestone, and to if everything goes well, by the end of the milestone, we'll open it up to the whole company. As we'll discuss later on, our initial opening up of the editor is to the product team and to get their feedback. And if there are no blockers coming out of there, then it will be great to open it up to the rest of the company and then let the floodgates open. As I mentioned in the weekly briefing in Slack, our focus this week should really be about planning, breaking down and getting momentum on the 13.3 issues. I've gone through those issues with most of you now. It's just chat I need to go through it with still. But I think if we can kind of like get our heads down, we can power through most of the work in the first week or two. At least to a point where we will have a sense of confidence around our objective for 13.3. So let's make as much progress as we can early on and see what that feedback brings us from the product side. Right, getting into the GitLab product for the static site editor. Enrique, can you give us a quick update on the integration work?
Sure. So this week, my hope is that we can start performatting the pages of the handbook product section. Before that, we have to deliver 2 merge requests. One is to fix the order list that the static site editor generates. We don't want those lists to be incrementable, the marker of those lists. I left the link of that merge request in the document. The second one is about fixing break line tags that the editor is introducing in a markdown document that are not necessary. So after we deliver that, those land production, Eric will help us with formatting those product pages.
All right. Well, that essentially answers my second question, which is what is blocking us from launching it to the product team. I know Eric and I've discussed an issue as well of creating an issue for them to give us feedback. So that's the kind of like all in place. So we essentially just need to wait for these last few things to be delivered on production, and so that we can pre-format those pages. Just speaking on the rolling it out to the rest of the handbook, Eric, Enrique and I had a quick discussion about this earlier, and on the whole topic of pre-formatting. So it will obviously not be feasible to pre-format it via the UI, and so that's something we just need to consider for the global rollout. I guess if once we've adopted the standard handbook formatting and we've made all of these changes, if the noise ratio is sufficiently down to the point where it's only fixing, let's say, proper issues like spaces, trailing spaces that aren't needed, or lack of new lines. As long as the noise isn't that high, I guess we don't have to go the pre-format route, but it's something we'll have to investigate when we get closer to it.
Yeah, and that's my hope too. I was gonna share my plans in the product update, but I think the focus for the next couple of weeks is being more actively communicative on Slack and recording videos and walkthroughs and offering examples and getting everybody excited about it. So that it would include most likely a disclaimer when we roll out more widely that the first merge request is going to include some formatting optimization, which is a good thing, hopefully in most cases, and that will make for a little bit of a noisy diff, but hopefully with a typo, there's not too much to diff anyway, and people can look past that. and subsequent MRs will be just fine.
So I just want to add something real quick to 1A2, the BRs. And again, this is part of kind of the conversation, I guess I'm still looking for feedback on, is we can actually solve this on the front end as well. Again, the question is that a good idea or not? I don't know. But in terms of like the spacing and like the end of the file needs a new line, like those types of things, we can actually do on the front end. It's a question of, is that a good idea or not? And I actually have, I'll share the link in 1A2 to the specific comment I'm referring to. So it's possible, it's just a matter of, is it a good idea? And that's something I need to still work with Enrique on. So.
Yeah, it brings the concept of linting preference, I guess, or dictation from our product feature, and so it's almost like a strategic question rather than an executional question that we need to make. Because if we do go down that road, we'll probably want to down the line make that configurable, which is not necessarily a bad idea, but by doing that, we're automatically adding to our surface area of features we need to support and so on. So I don't have a strong opinion on that. I think technically I'm fine with this, but I'll let Eric make the final call on whether that's something we go with.
And I just want to say, I'm not advocating for it. It's just something, as I was working on it, I realized this is something we could do. And again, I'm not sure if we should, number one, and two, if that's the right place. So just.
I mean, I'll leave the architectural decisions about it being a right place to more qualified people, but the strategic, I agree with John, the strategic answer is we should probably just focus on fixing the bug with Squire that introduces the new line breaks, and put off any like stylistic or linting or cleanup changes for later, which I do think would be really great, but would probably expose us to even more variables as we expand into different static site generators or people's different preferences. And as far as I understand with Markdown, like multiple line breaks after your second really doesn't impact the or shouldn't impact the rendering. And I don't really think that we need to enforce anything there yet, but it might be something that clicking a cleanup button in our eventual UI would resolve, and it would just auto format everything to make it really like nice and strict. And that could be something that actually is really beneficial for users eventually, maybe in the complete and lovable phases of our product.
I think, again, just, I don't want to dwell on this too long, but I think a nice side effect of that would be enforcing that linting, is like to communicate people that are using Markdown that once you have multiple spaces, you're not actually doing that in the page itself, which I think people are expecting. And same thing with the BR. Like once you do a new line, you don't actually need a BR. And I think people have learned that that's what they think occurs. So anyway, we can move on.
All right then. Onto the GitLab handbook. Chad, can you give us a Monarch update, please?
Sure. How can we keep this simple? So high level, it's becoming more and more clear that the handbook and the various marketing sites, the blog and everything else want to go different directions, are going different directions, and that's becoming more and more urgent and driving what we want from the separation and isolation of the code in the repo. And what I've been working on over the past few weeks is trying to do that. And we originally had a plan where we would try to approach it more incrementally. Like we've got the handbook moved out, and then we're going to try to do just the blog. And for various reasons, mostly related to the way middleman works and the way the site is implemented for the blog and the releases and the rest of the site and how everything is shared, it's not possible to, without making major changes to the content of the site, to not just move everything else down. So that's the current plan. We're going to move everything else that's not the handbook into its own site. But even with that, there's some important decisions to be made about how much we want to share, how much we want to duplicate, and some very real trade-offs when you get into the technical weeds of that. And Jean's got opinions on that. I've got opinions on that. They're not always the same. And so that's why I wrote that giant note that I copied everybody on to sort of brain dump them out. So at least other people were aware of these things that we were discussing. And as part of, and that was good. That clarified it. That's still a hard decision that we need to think about. And then I realized, you know, there's a bunch of other stuff, a few things that we really have to clean up, and a lot of other things that we really could easily clean up that would make all of these other hard decisions much easier to reason about. Essentially to get to what is left to a point where it's a bunch of small independent deploys that are very already separated and isolated from each other. And so that's this second one that I wrote up. And I'm just going to put that phase 1 link in there, which summarizes most of them. And so that all of the tasks that I came up with, these preliminary refactorings, I dumped in an issue, and I'm just working through those. And we're going to definitely have a meeting today to talk more about this. But I think I feel better about the direction that it's going and that we have a viable way forward, which I haven't really felt for the past few weeks because of uncertainty and running into blind alleys that I had to back out of.
All right.
That's it.
So just a reminder that conversation about how we're going to deal with the shared files is happening a little later today at 1900 UTC. So it's open to all. I did send the invite to me, Chad, Lauren, and Michael and Brandon, but it's essentially open to all. It is on our shared calendar, so feel free to jump in if you're available and give some insight. Okay, so since we have Susan here, I will quickly give a docs update. So Susan, you weren't here last week, but Jacques is out on paternity leave, if you're not aware yet, and I will be taking over the responsibilities from him while he is out. The active work that is currently in our system is the offline docs research that Vasily is working on. So he was out sick for a week in 13.2, so he's still catching up on that. So it's carrying over to 13.3. And then also the tier rename work. I spoke with Vasily earlier today about that, and the thing we want to consider there is there was another issue around using variables in the docs, and whatever approach we take with the tier rename might be a starting point for the variable work. So we want to just look at both angles and make sure we don't just implement a short-sighted solution, but if we do implement something that it could potentially be the base framework for introducing variables into the docs. So both of these are kind of like for R&D in delivery, and so Vasily will once he's got a clear opinion, he will document that in those issues with the proposed way forward. And then if there's agreement on those proposed ways forward, then we'll need to look at the actual development effort involved and schedule it. I think the offline docs one might be a bit of a bigger one that needs to be tackled probably over a couple of milestones. The tier rename could potentially be a candidate for 13.4 for us to get in. I know there's a kind of like a real life event where this happens, and we'll need to try and see if we can get it in before that actually happens.
Yes.
But, yeah,
Okay.
it's on our radar, and hopefully an update on those coming soon in the issues.
I just added some user research comments about the /help issue. I just added them to that issue.
Oh, awesome.
We got a formal report last week.
Oh, that's great. We'll definitely have a look into that. Eric.
I thought this was, was tuning in. It was very timely that you joined. I think I got what amounts to a sales, a cold call from a cold email from a sales, but it had me thinking that I don't actually know the answer of how we approach internationalization in our docs, if we do at all, and are we interested in building that out further, or yeah, how do we contract that out? Do we even translate any of them?
So I think it's done informally. I think it's done on a community basis. My team does not handle that.
Yeah.
And I don't know a lot of details. That's about what I know.
Okay. Yeah, I think I remember hearing of the community, leveraging the community for that. That's really that's a perfect answer. That's all I need to know.
Okay.
Alrighty then. Over to Gitter update, Eric Eastwood.
Okay, on the Gitter side, we completed GitLab user namespace communities, so I can finally create a community under my username / mad little mods, or whichever sort of personal projects people are working on. I'm now working on the ability to export data for a given user. I'm probably going to add in the future, like you can export data for this community if you're a room admin, community admin, that sort of thing. And then coming up soon, the FY21 Q2 OKR, working on adding some PWA features so you can install it to your homepage, adding the web app manifest. Back to you, Eric.
Yeah, I don't have a ton that hasn't already been covered. As John mentioned, I just posted a link to the feedback issue that I created. So as we do make this editor available to the product team, I'm going to ask them to drop comments in there. I think that would be a great way to centralize it and expose, and then I'll create issues for anything that doesn't have an issue already. I want to be wary of getting feedback and trying to take action immediately. I don't want to distract anybody. So I think this is probably the best workflow for that. And I'm also, didn't get to finish writing the last word on my last comment. I was thinking of coordinating another Think Big session. It's been a while since we've had a synchronous, like big brainstorming, thinking big. On the tails of that diagram and sketch that I did, I got some pretty positive feedback on that from the recording. And I think we could take that and pick it apart a little bit in more detail and map it back to user value and actual features. User story mapping has worked really well for this kind of thing in the past. It does require somewhat of a synchronous meeting that can get expensive. So I'll gauge interest and try and find a time that overlaps with as many people as possible. And potentially do 2 of them. But yeah, I'm mindful of everybody's schedule. So no concrete plans for that yet.
This is one that since we've got that time slot on a Thursday that we either do the retro or the social call on, I think it would be a worthwhile sacrifice to sacrifice a social call for this. For those of you that weren't here at the beginning of the start of this group, those Think Big sessions were really helpful in just trying to understand what we're going to do and how we go from a blank canvas to something. And so I fully agree that while we need to be inclusive of different time zones, it really is a great opportunity for synchronous discussion and to make sure that we actually get people's input. This is not a nice one to just catch up on. It's great to be part of the conversation because you get to help to shape the future of what we build. And that's important to be part of as well.
If we're going to use a social call, then I would say drinking is allowed during Think Big sessions, maybe even encouraged. And the other thing I would say is I would start to invite people outside of this group for feedback and input. This would be something open to a larger group. Not the whole company by any means, but like I'd pick a few key stakeholders. This isn't going to be a presentation or anything.
All right. Lauren, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here and see if you're gonna bite. Any update on the CMS decision, the candidates that was identified? Anything you can share with us?
Yeah, so we've narrowed it down to 3: Contentful, Netlify, and Datto CMS, and we're going with the headless route. So now we're going to be investigating each of those, and then eventually doing proof of concept for engineering, just to see how that integration could work, and then also for the editors to get a peek of what the editing experience is going to feel like. So that's where we are at.
I think it'll be great to stay in touch on, especially the proof of concepts that you will be putting together to have a look at those editing experiences and see how that might kind of like give us some insights as to things we might want to try.
So
Yeah,
just for context, the plan is to leave the deploy itself still going to live in the same place under about GitLab.com, the same pages. You're just changing the CMS. And
yeah, where we pulled the data from to initiate that build. Yeah, I would like to not deal with the build and re-engineering that.
Cool, and that was my understanding, and that was sort of my thinking behind prioritizing, like, let's just get everything as an independent build and we can go the different directions with the stuff that we want sooner than later, and then worry about the hard parts of like sharing it and breaking it up later.
We're definitely gonna have to deal with the shared files. So I'm looking forward to that meeting later today.
I'm going to be particularly interested in the analysis of Netlify CMS, because my impression using it is that it's not as, I mean, this is recorded. I don't mean to badmouth some other product, but it's not as, it doesn't hit as many of the requirements as I think that people might be thinking. The experience is very focused on just, pulling the data out into form fields and submitting that back. So
yeah, I really think that's going to be one where integrating it from the, engineering is going to be easier, but the editing experience isn't going to hit all the requirements for the editors. So that's where that proof of concept is going to come really handy.
Anybody else have anything to add before we hang up? And once, twice. Have a good day, everybody. Cheers.